Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Bob Mendelsohn, and this is the Bob's Your Uncle podcast. Today we speak about the war in Ukraine, as I'm as close as I can get just now on the Poland side of the border. And we think through some of what's happening, why so many title the action of Mr. Putin saber-rattling, and what just might happen in the weeks to come. Stay tuned. Thanks for joining me for this Bob's Your Uncle podcast, Season 1, Episode 10. Of note, the opinions are strictly my own and those of any of my guests. You can now find us and comment to us wherever you get your podcasts. Spotify, Pandora, Apple iTunes, the list goes on. We have a lot of topics to discuss, and even so, on the Bob's Your Uncle podcast, you are part of the show. We do want to see and hear you. Send us a message on Facebook or video one to us on Instagram. In the weeks to come, we'll speak about pickleball, country music, baseball fields and lawn care, Iran and wars and rumors of wars. Let's see where the spirit takes us. Historical marker of the week. On this date in history, the 4th of May, in 1942, during World War II, U.S. air and naval fleets turned back a Japanese invasion force heading for the strategic Port Moresby, New Guinea, in the Battle of the Coral Sea. Also, 19 years later, leaving from Washington, D.C., the first Freedom Ride, a political protest against the segregation of interstate bus travel in the U.S. South, began as a group of white and black Americans left on buses bound for New Orleans, and that's the historical marker of the week. Today we speak with you directly and without guest about what's happening here in Poland and Ukraine. I flew here only a week ago and have spent many hours in the queue at the Ukrainian consulate and in discussions with ranking officials here. This is unusual for me to share what I'm seeing and what's encouraging me just now. I suppose the number one reality that I saw when the war began at the end of February was fear. Fear across the world. What would Vladimir Putin actually accomplish by bombing, by charging into Ukraine? We saw that long queue of tanks roaring across the border. He had spent months building an arsenal and building up apprehension in the world, and what would he do? No one was sure. Everyone was nervous. What he could do, well, he could ravage Ukraine, he could roll over Moldova or Belarus or any number of former Soviet republics. There was trauma. And when those bombs started falling across Ukraine, the people in the know were worried militarily what he could do. He had an arsenal that was very substantial. And the media was relentless about his possibility of harm. So fear was the natural response. And it wasn't merely in the West. It was there in Ukraine as well. People grabbed the coat. I mean, mind you, it was February. It was cold. It's still pretty cool here, and we're at the end of April, beginning of May. So it's not... Think about it. 2 months ago, it was winter, and people grabbed the coats and the scarves and the children, and they ran as quickly as they could west to Lviv, and then across to the border, and then wherever they could get out. They ran into Romania, to Poland, and they had an idea. They didn't know exactly where they were going, but they said things like, I have a cousin who lives in fill in the blank. Maybe I can go live with him. My uncle has a friend who said that we could stay there in fill in the blank. And so there was a motion towards something. Yes, they were running away from, but they were running to something else. I considered coming over here in those early days because, well, a couple personal reasons. My own grandmother was born in Zhytomyr, which is just west of Kiev, and I was sentimentally imagining my grandmother hopping on a transit to go west and to get away from the problems of the day at the turn of the 20th century. She finally left right around World War I and came over to the United States. But I was imagining myself being there, and which of my children and which of my clothes and which of my memorabilia, what would these things that my wife had carried since on and on. I just imagined my own persona and our own family, and I felt the pain that these people felt as they were running away. They grabbed no clothes, well, if they had some clothes, they wore it all. They had a little bag. They took some food, but not much. What can you schlep anyway? So there they were. That was the first wave, and it was a tough time to be sure. But then the media began to get used to and become enamored by another Vladi-Mir. That's Zelensky, the former comedian who became a sensation in Ukraine and became the president of that country. He wears only a t-shirt, and he looks military. He looks like he just came out of the gym. He looks like someone we could follow. He looks like and sounds like someone who says, we're not going to be the former Soviet Union any longer. We are Ukrainians. And just like that, the media war turned towards Ukraine. Just like that, and of course, the world opinion turned against Vladimir Putin, and all of a sudden, the war had stalled. Now the talking heads of military and politics, economics, sanctions, all began to weigh against Russia, at least from our perspective in the West. And according to the military folks, even this last week, there were dozens of foreign ministers, defense ministers from various countries around the globe who stand with Ukraine. The blue and yellow flags are flying everywhere. They're certainly flying here in eastern Poland. Amazing time. As a result, the people who are leaving now from Ukraine, whether from Dnepropetrovsk or Kiev or from Odessa or any other number of places, are not so much running to, but running from. They're not going somewhere else. They're not trying to get to Germany or Argentina or Australia. They're trying to get away temporarily from the madness of Vladimir Putin. They know that the war will be over somewhat soon, and as a result, they're not trying to leave to get elsewhere. They want to go back home. I almost hear Odysseus saying that he wants to go home. I almost hear E.T. saying he wants to phone home. There's something about home that is a magnet for the people of Ukraine. They're very proud of who they are. The military, as they go up to battle against the Russian forces, are singing a song that kind of as a lark the ambassador came up with. And they are singing it and giving themselves strength again. We are Ukrainians. We are Ukraine. It flashes back to the 2013 uprising, that winter of their discontent. It's a fascinating time, and I want you to know that as I see it and as I hear about it, that I'm thinking about another Vladi-Mir, Prince of Peace or Prince of the World, someone who I can follow, whether he's wearing a t-shirt or a long white robe. There's something going on here that harkens to another Prince of Peace, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. And just in case you missed it, Vladi-Mir means Prince of Peace. Oh, and I did mention saber-rattling, and it'd be good to look at the Merriam-Webster definition of that and when it began, around 1879, 1880, and it was used first in the UK. Some think it comes from the practice of 18th century Hungarian cavalry units, and others said it came from the habit that military officers had in the early 20th century of ominously shaking their scabbard when issuing orders to subordinates. This is not to say that there's not been some group of Hungarian or others so renowned for their penchant for rattling their sabers that they became synonymous with bellicose posturing. If there was, however, they do not appear to have been widely documented in the written records of the 19th century. And by the way, you could use swords as well as sabers. As in the case with many of the expressions and words taken from military jargon, says the Merriam-Webster website, saber-rattling appears to be moving further afield from its roots, although it's still most often found used to refer to potentially militaristic action. It may also serve to refer to slightly more peaceable conflicts as well. Robert Shepard said in 1994, "A modest amount of legalistic saber-rattling is probably acceptable in divorce and referendum campaigns, but there have to be practical limits." This figurative use isn't explicitly defined just yet, but as Merriam-Webster says, it's certainly making a lot of noise. All that to say that Vladimir Putin has rattled the saber not only in this enterprise, in this war of 2022, but earlier in his career in 2013, 2014 with Crimea, and it seems to be a regular and ongoing part of his modus operandi. We'll see where that takes us next. What then will be the end result of this conflict? My guess, though I'm not a prophet, my guess is that it will all calm down. Putin will put his saber back in his scabbard, and the world will go back to comfortable hostility between nations. I don't think they will carry on this war. They are at a depleted state just now, and his soldiers are weary from frontline activity. So my guess is that somehow he will pull back and announce in TASS or Pravda, the Soviet news agency or the Soviet propaganda machine, that they won the war, that the eastern sections of Ukraine will comply with Soviet and Russian evaluations. Somehow he will win the propaganda war at home, and all the rest of the world will breathe a sigh of relief. I think these second wave refugees will go back home to have to rebuild Mariupol and Kyiv and all these areas around these cities. It will be a lot of work. I think the world will pour in funds, and I think people will come with construction activities and serve, even as I'm seeing all these people from around the globe who have come here just now to serve the refugees. I think they'll go back into Ukraine and they will take medical activities to a new level. It will be an amazing time to watch the world continue to pour out kindness and grace to the Ukrainian people. May it be soon and speedily and in our days. Amanda McInnes is both my travel agent and the sponsor of this podcast, and it will help if you book your next trip with her, including hotel and flights and all things tourist. Good morning, Amanda. A travel agent. What makes you do this for people?
I think the biggest thing for me is that it is, and it can be very, very rewarding. So it's not really just about booking people from point A to point B, but you form relationships and you become a part of someone's long-term journey. You really become a part of what happens in their life, which is amazing.
Any advice about Russia, Ukraine?
But one of the big things I would always suggest, checking with Smart Traveler and checking the travel advice. And the other big one is any do not travel destination is most likely not covered by your travel insurance for safety reasons.
How do people reach you?
The best way to reach me is via email, amanda.mckinnis@travelpartners.com.au.
Well, have a blessed day. Thanks so much.
You as well. Stay safe. Bye.
Every week we read from the #1 bestseller of nonfiction of all time, the Bible. And this week is no different. And in light of our comments about Vladi-Mir, I thought we should read Isaiah chapter 9. A child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders. His name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. There will be no end to the increase of his government or of peace on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it, to uphold it with justice and righteousness from then on and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this. Do you have a comment or question? Do you agree with us? Hit us up on bobmendo@aol.com or on Twitter or Instagram, and we'll read your views next week. Don't forget to post a review on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you're listening, and share our podcast with your mates, your friends, your enemies. Thanks for helping us get known out there. And please follow or subscribe to the podcast, hit like, help us get all the good speak we can get. And don't forget to book all your travel needs with Amanda McInnes at travelpartners.com.au. Next week, another great guest will join us, and we will probably still be here in Poland. Then I'm back to Sydney. This microphone will not get tired of the travel. Until then, from me, Bob Mendelsohn, when things seem bleak or uncertain, look up to God. He's in his heaven, and Bob's your uncle. Shalom for now.